By 1917, the Great War was no longer a conflict of nations. It had become a force of nature, a relentless, grinding pressure on the very fabric of civilization. For 3 years, it had consumed men, material, and hope with an insatiable appetite. On the home fronts, the initial patriotic fervor had long since curdled into a grim cocktail of hunger, exhaustion, and grief. Rationing, shortages, and the ever-present casualty lists were a daily reality. This was a war of attrition, not just on the battlefield, but against societies, economies, and the human spirit itself. And in 1917, that immense, unyielding pressure would finally cause the foundations of the old world to crack and shatter. 2 massive, earth-shaking ruptures would redefine the conflict entirely. One ancient empire, hollowed out from the inside, would spectacularly collapse under the strain. And across the Atlantic, a powerful neutral nation, long hesitant to join the European slaughter, would be decisively pushed from the sidelines and into the heart of the fight. This is the story of 1917, the year the war's stalemate was broken, the year revolution and intervention changed everything, and the year the conflict truly became a world war. Of all the belligerents, none felt this pressure more acutely than the Russian Empire. The Eastern Front had been a theater of staggering scale and brutality, a swirling, chaotic conflict that had bled the Tsar's armies white. While Russia had mobilized immense manpower, its industrial base and logistical network were woefully inadequate for a modern war. Stories of soldiers being sent to the front without rifles, told to pick one up from a fallen comrade, were not just propaganda. They were a grim reality. The initial success of the 1916 Brusilov offensive had come at a catastrophic cost, leaving the army demoralized and depleted. For Germany, despite the immense effort, the Eastern Front was a strategic success, tying down millions of enemy troops and slowly strangling the Russian war effort. Back home, the situation was even more dire. The exceptionally cold winter of 1916-17 paralyzed an already failing transportation system. Food and fuel couldn't reach the cities. In the capital, Petrograd, the people were literally freezing and starving in the streets. The war had become an anchor, dragging the entire Tsarist regime down into the abyss. The breaking point came in March of 1917, or February according to the old Julian calendar then used in Russia. It began not with soldiers, but with women textile workers in Petrograd who walked out of their factories on International Women's Day, demanding bread. Their protests swelled, drawing in other workers and citizens until the streets were flooded with 250,000 people. The critical moment came when the soldiers of the Petrograd garrison, ordered to fire on the crowds, hesitated, and then joined them. The Tsar had lost control of his own capital. On March 15th, Tsar Nicholas II abdicated, ending 3 centuries of Romanov rule. A weak provisional government, composed of liberals and moderate socialists, took over. It made a fatal error. It promised the Allies it would continue the war. This decision completely ignored the mood of the country. In the trenches, in the factories, and in the villages, a different, more powerful idea was spreading, encapsulated in a simple, potent slogan: peace, land, and bread. This was the promise of a radical faction, the Bolsheviks, led by the exiled revolutionary Vladimir Lenin, who Germany shrewdly transported back to Russia in a sealed train, hoping he would sow chaos. He did exactly that, and his message found a desperate and receptive audience. Then, in November, what became known as the October Revolution, the Bolsheviks, with their disciplined organization and clear message, seized power in a swift coup. Their first and most pressing major act was to make good on their promise of peace. They sued for an immediate armistice with the Central Powers. The resulting Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, signed in early 1918, would be a massive, humiliating surrender for Russia, ceding vast territories and resources to Germany. But in the final months of 1917, the practical effect was immediate and profound. The Eastern Front, which had consumed millions of lives for 3 years, simply dissolved. The Russian army disintegrated. For Germany, This was a strategic windfall of epic proportions. It could now begin the process of shifting nearly 1 million battle-hardened soldiers from the east to the west to deliver a final, decisive blow. For the Allies, it was an unmitigated disaster. The entire balance of power in the war had just been violently tipped in Germany's favor. Now, on the Western Front, the Allied High Command was gripped by a new urgency. They had to achieve a breakthrough before those veteran German divisions from the east could arrive and tip the scales for good. The French commander, General Robert Nivelle, was a man supremely confident in his own abilities. He had a new plan, a new scientific method. He promised a massive, rolling artillery barrage so perfectly timed and overwhelming that it would obliterate the German defenses, allowing his infantry to simply walk across no man's land. He guaranteed a war-winning victory in 48 hours. In April 1917, the attack went in along the Chemin de Dam Ridge near the Aisne River. It was a catastrophic, unmitigated failure. The barrage was ineffective. The German defenses were far stronger than anticipated, and the French infantry were sent directly into a meat grinder of machine gun fire. The gains were measured in yards, while the casualties were horrific, with nearly 40,000 French soldiers killed in just a few days. Nivelle's promise was broken, and with it, something inside the French army finally snapped. What followed was not a mass desertion or a violent uprising, but something more subtle and, to the High Command, more terrifying. Historians call it collective, passive disobedience. The French poilus, the hairy ones, the common infantrymen, had simply had enough. They would hold the line. They would defend their trenches against any German attack. But they collectively refused to participate in any more pointless, suicidal offensives. The mutinies spread through more than half of the French divisions on the Western Front. Regiments elected spokesmen to present their grievances. There were even accounts of soldiers releasing regiment mascots, like goats or dogs, into officers' quarters as a symbolic protest against their animal-like treatment. It was a silent, powerful, and widespread mutiny. The High Command was terrified, suppressing all news of it from the press. They acted swiftly, replacing the disgraced Nivelle with General Philippe Pétain, a commander known for his greater concern for his men's lives. Pétain traveled to the front, listened to the soldiers, granted more regular leave, improved the food, and tacitly promised an end to large-scale feudal attacks. The French army would hold, but its offensive fighting spirit was shattered, and it would not launch another major assault for over a year. While the French army was quietly recuperating, the burden of offensive action fell squarely on the British. Field Marshal Douglas Haig launched another massive offensive in Flanders, Belgium. Officially known as the Third Battle of Ypres, it is forever remembered by the name of its final, terrible objective, the village of Passchendaele. The battle began in July with the heaviest artillery bombardment of the war, which successfully shattered the German trenches, but also, crucially, destroyed the region's intricate drainage systems. Then, the heaviest rains in 30 years began to fall. The low-lying ground, already cratered by millions of shells, became a nightmarish, impassable quagmire of liquid mud. Men, mules, and horses slipped from narrow duckboard tracks and drowned in the thick, sucking sludge of the shell holes. It was a battle fought against the elements as much as against the enemy. The deadliest moments were often random and anonymous. A misstep into a deep, water-filled crater, a collapsing trench wall burying men alive, or the relentless soaking chill that led to trench foot and pneumonia. Amidst this European horror, a new, decisive factor was preparing to enter the fray. The United States had maintained a policy of neutrality, watching the carnage from afar. But two pivotal events in early 1917 changed everything. First, on February 1st, Germany, desperate to starve Britain into submission before its own resources ran out, made a fateful gamble. It resumed a policy of unrestricted submarine warfare, declaring its U-boats would sink any ship, neutral or otherwise, approaching the British Isles. This was a direct challenge to American shipping and lives. Second, and even more inflammatory, was a secret diplomatic proposal intercepted by British intelligence. The Zimmermann telegram, sent from the German Foreign Secretary to the German ambassador in Mexico, was a stunning proposition. It offered Mexico a military alliance. If the United States entered the war, Mexico should attack the US. In return, Germany would help Mexico reconquer its lost territories of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. The British decoded the message and passed it to Washington. Its publication in American newspapers on March 1st caused an explosion of public outrage. The combination was politically lethal. The sinking of American ships and the audacious German plot to incite an attack on U.S. soil swept away the last vestiges of American neutrality. On April 6, 1917, the United States Congress formally declared war on Germany. In his address, President Woodrow Wilson framed the intervention in lofty idealistic terms, calling it a crusade to make the world safe for democracy. The immediate military impact was small. The U.S. had a tiny standing army and needed time to mobilize. But the long-term implications were immense. American troops, fresh, optimistic, and untouched by years of war weariness, the doughboys as they were called, would soon begin arriving in France by the tens of thousands. More importantly, America's colossal industrial might would now be fully committed to feeding the Allied war machine. For the weary, nearly bankrupt Allies, the psychological boost was immeasurable. After 3 years of bloody stalemate, it was the first real, tangible hope of ultimate victory since 1914. But getting those American men and materials to Europe meant crossing an Atlantic Ocean infested with German U-boats. In the spring of 1917, the U-boats were sinking ships at an alarming rate, threatening to win the war for Germany. The solution was a quieter, technological lifesaver, the convoy system. Instead of sailing alone, merchant ships were grouped together and escorted by naval destroyers. This simple tactic made it much harder for a lone U-boat to attack. But the system was made vastly more effective by a new form of intelligence. A key tool was the wireless radio. The British Admiralty established a network of radio direction-finding stations along the coasts. German U-boat commanders had to surface to radio reports back to their base. When they did, these stations could intercept the faint signals and, by taking bearings from multiple locations, triangulate the submarine's position. This intelligence, gathered in room 40 of the Admiralty, allowed convoy routes to be altered in real time, steering the vital ships clear of known U-boat patrol lines. This invisible game of cat and mouse on the airwaves was a critical, unsung victory. It saved countless tons of supplies and thousands of lives, blunting the U-boat menace and ensuring that America's strength could reach the battlefield. So, 1917 closed with the Western Front still locked in its bloody stalemate, but the world around it had been utterly and irrevocably transformed. An ancient empire had fallen to revolution, unleashing a new and potent ideology onto the world stage. The French army had been broken and rebuilt, while the British had bled themselves white in the mud of Flanders. And a new power, a reluctant giant from across the sea, had finally been summoned to the fight, bringing with it the promise of unlimited resources and fresh manpower. The final act of the Great War was now prepared. The war had birthed a revolution and awakened a giant. The question was no longer if the war would end, but how it would end, who would be left standing, and what kind of world would emerge from the ruins. Given the seismic shifts of 1917, which event do you believe most fundamentally altered the course of the war? The internal collapse of Russia, which freed up 1 million German soldiers, or the external entry of the United States, which promised a near-endless supply of men and material for the Allies? Each event dramatically shifted the balance of power in opposite directions. Share your analysis in the comments below.